All right, everybody, we're going to go ahead and get started here. First and foremost, does everybody hear me okay? Across the back here, doing well? Okay, beautiful. Well, thank you all so much for coming to tonight's Fireside Chat on Sky Mountain. We have our wonderful guests here today that'll be speaking, Dr. Raymond Turpin, Dr. Christopher Bache. We'll give a little bit more into them, but first and foremost, I want to give a big thank you to Melissa and Joe Summerage for letting us stay at this lovely facility here to have our talk tonight. This is such an incredible venue in and of itself. Thank you so much for this opportunity here. A couple of housekeeping items there too. There are bathrooms straight back by the stairs there. Anybody needs to use the restroom. Also water stations over there with hot and cold water. If anybody needs to stand up, stretch around, please feel free to do so. We'll ask that, welcome to take pictures and such, but we are taking a formal video, which we will release through the Psychedelic Society website. So if you guys can refrain from some video, we'll make sure that we make that available to everyone. And I'd like to introduce myself and a couple of the co-founders of Psychedelic Society and a little bit about what we're about here. My name is Ehren Cruz. I'm a psychedelic ceremonial facilitator. I've been working with Sacramental Entheogenics for 15 years. Professional certified coach, third wave psychedelic certified coach, anthropologist by trade, and also I have a couple of other wonderful co-facilitators and also founders of Psychedelic Society. We have Sarah Salix over here, Levine, Dan Casciato over here, and in the back, Daniel Polk, the original founder, who instigated this whole amazing group here together. And several community members who have been a part of this experience. I see some new faces here, but many have been a part of this for now, going on over a little bit over a year. And to break things up, and thank you, Chris, for this great idea. How many of you are new to psychedelics in general? New to psychedelics? Okay, awesome. How many of you have been on your own journey with psychedelics, but are still kind of growing and emerging that maybe the last few years, starting to get some steam and momentum there? Any tenured psychonauts and deep divers out here? Okay, plenty of hands. Excellent. Now, how many of you guys work within the mental health field? Just curious there. Okay, awesome. And let's talk about some specifics here. Favorable to psilocybin. How many people are psilocybin is your medicine there? Excellent. LSD. Okay, see several hands going up several times. Respect. MDMA. And how about DMT or ayahuasca? La madre. Okay, beautiful. Okay, well, welcome everybody. This is our tribe. Before we kind of go into things here, I'd like to kind of set the stage with a little bit of our mission, our vision, and the ethics that we represent. Then we'll kind of dive into the deeper conversation here. So a mission of Psychedelic Society of Asheville is to educate, advocate, and create community around the healing and transformational power of psychedelics. Now, our vision, we provide support, resources, and a safe container for those seeking guidance and healing, spiritual growth, and personal development through psychedelics. We serve to foster the development of an informed culture that respects indigenous lineage, scientific research, harm reduction principles, ethics, and personal responsibility in the intentional use and facilitation of psychedelic medicine. For ethics, these containers that we strive for provide physical safety. Just so you guys know, it's very important that consent is the highest priority, both in what you choose to share, how you choose to share that, and how you choose to express and experience touch and connection. Psychological safety, of course, is actually critical importance as well. What we share here is to be honored within the confines of this space, unless someone gives you a direct word to take their truth and sail it outward. Otherwise, please honor the respect for someone's own discretion when they're sharing with you in this space. Transparency, speak from the authentic I, speak from your own place of value, and honor those of others as well. Diversity, equity, and inclusion. We really strive to make sure that there is a balanced representation of gender, balanced representation of culture, and also for people how they self-identify. And we are on a quest to continue to make this a more welcoming and inviting place for all aspects and walks of life. So if you see people that are underrepresented and curious about this particular type of work, please welcome them in, and love to make them feel that this is a home for however you identify. This is a place for you, and we love and we're richer for it. And self-care is also incredibly important to us. So do what you need to do to feel healthy and hale. That means, stretching, taking a moment, all those things are very, very important, and want to make sure that you have the space to shake the body well. So with that there, we're going to kind of dive into a few more things. But first, you know what? Let's go ahead and do a land acknowledgement. We are on Cherokee Chilagi First Nation land out here. And in the deep time of our work in psychedelics and deep time of our work in stewardship of this planet, we really lean into and learn from the wisdom of our ancestors. So I want to take a moment just to acknowledge that this is sacred land and that we are gifted with the opportunity to be stewards and caretakers of this space, and may we uphold the virtues and values they have brought before us and carry that forward. So let's give a couple moments to honor the Chilagi Cherokee First Nation. Aho. All right, now on to the talk here. So we are really grateful to have two amazing gentlemen here. I know Dr. Turpin doesn't maybe describe himself as an elder yet, but you are an elder to me, good sir. So you've made it. Congratulations. So we, these two individuals have done so much for the community, for psychedelics at large, not just, in this particular region, but in the larger movement. So I'm going to go and introduce them, both of you two here, with some basic bios, and then we'll get into some questions here for them. So Dr. Bache, in November 24th, 1979, Christopher M. Bache took the first step of what would become a life-changing journey. Drawing from his training as a philosopher of religion, Bache set out to explore his mind and the mind of the universe as deeply and systematically as possible, with the help of psychedelic drug LSD. Following protocols established by the great Stanislav Grof, Bache's 73 high-dose LSD sessions over the course of 20 years drew him into a deepening communion with cosmic consciousness. Christopher Bache is a professor emeritus in the Department of Philosophy and Religious Studies at Youngstown State University, adjunct faculty at the California Institute of Integral Studies, emeritus fellow at the Institute of Noetic Sciences, and on the advisory council of the Grof Legacy Training. Please welcome Dr. Christopher Bache. Dr. Turpin has been studying the therapeutic use of psychedelics in the relevant literature since the mid-'80s, hoping to eventually legally use these medicines in psychology practice. Specializing in the treatment of trauma, Dr. Turpin has extensive experience with children, adolescents, and families in a multitude of settings, but has focused his practice on older adolescents and adults in recent years. Dr. Turpin earned a bachelor's degree in psychology at the University of Georgia in '88, his master's degree in psychology from the Humanistic Psychology program at West Georgia College in 1990, and his doctoral degree in clinical psychology from the California Institute of Integral Studies in San Francisco, CIIS, in 1999. In 2017, he earned a certificate in psychedelic therapy and research from CIIS. In addition to his private psychotherapy practice in Waynesville, North Carolina, Dr. Turpin was a mentor for the 2022-23 CIIS certificate program, and will be lead mentor as well and a trainee mentor in 23-24. And he's one of the co-founders of the Pearl Psychedelic Institute here in Waynesville. Everyone, please welcome Dr. Turpin. All right, so let's dive into where this all began. So prior to your first formal experience, what first turned you guys on to psychedelics? What was it about these compounds that initially piqued your interest and then sparked engagement?
Why don't you start this?
Okay, great, all right. I would have to go back to probably 1980, early 84 probably, when I was finishing up my freshman year at the University of Georgia, and just kind of actually into the summer. And I discovered Flashbacks, which was Timothy Leary's autobiography. He was still alive at the time. And I read that, and I already knew kind of who he was, and I was just stunned by the guy's brilliance in his writing and his insight. And he wrote a good bit about psilocybin and LSD in that book. And then, much to my parents' chagrin, all the way to Mississippi at Thanksgiving, I was in the backseat chattering about Timothy Leary, and my dad was not real excited about that. He was a little conservative. And so it wasn't until October of '84 where I managed to score some mushrooms with two of my good friends that I'd grown up with. And we migrated out to the cemetery outside in Athens, Georgia, which that sounds creepy, but this was a place we would kind of go and walk around and just fascinated reading the gravestones and putting stories together. It was kind of a sacred place to us. And so went out there, found a little field laid down by the creek, and I was laying there, and I had this intense vision of just seeing myself. At the time, I was an advertising major. I'd grown up in Atlanta, had gone to this prep school with a lot of old Atlanta money, and my family was definitely kind of middle class, and so I felt like I was a dirt farmer. And so when I got out of high school, I thought it was all about making money. So I figured, kind of creative, I'll do the advertising thing. And during this psilocybin experience, which was quite profound, it just kind of, I saw myself succeeding in this field and feeling extremely empty about it. And there was almost a voice in my head saying, what are you doing? You're going to convince people to buy a bunch of crap they don't need? What are you doing? And I said, what am I doing? And then I started figuring out where this is coming from. This wasn't in the mushrooms. This was unlocking a part of myself that had kind of been socialized out over the last few years, and it seemed to be more of my true self. So I got fascinated with that, and then started going to the UGA library and pulling off old bound journals and finding all the old LSD research, particularly from the 50s and the 60s, and realizing what all was being done with these compounds back then. And they were doing some pretty amazing studies, and some people that had some pretty refractory problems were getting well. And then the fact that it had all been buried astounded me. And so I just kind of decided to devote my life back then to continuing to study these things, continuing to research them personally and academically, and hopefully be in a position one day to be able to use these things legally. So that's kind of how it all got started. And then the Grateful Dead was a big piece of it too. Once I went to my first Dead show, Halloween 1985, that locked me into a whole nother level of psychedelics and using it somewhat ritualistically in large crowds. So that was another big shaper of my experiences growing up.
Oh, yeah, awesome.
Yeah.
We'll get more there too.
The Grateful Dead, I'm afraid, did not ever have a significant impact on my life in that respect. But I know, I'm deprived, I know. I was just out of graduate school, had been given the opportunity for a high quality classical Ivy League education. I was pretty confirmed atheistically inclined agnostic when I finished my degree in religious studies and philosophy of religion. And I met the work of Stan Grof. Let me back up. Saturn Return. I'd just come out of my Saturn Return, just begun my teaching career. The first year of my teaching career, looking around what to do, I found Stan's book, Realms of the Human Unconscious. And he lit the fire, and I knew that this was really important to my discipline, philosophy of religion. And I knew the only way to really work this was not intellectually and conceptually, but you had to do the work. You had to get into it and do the work. This is 1978, and the work was illegal at that point. So I decided to be illegal, and I'm not an illegal person by nature, but I decided to sort of do my academic work, and to do this work with the idea that sooner or later, somewhere down the road, I would be able to harvest it as a philosopher of religion to bring it forward for its cosmological and philosophical import. I wasn't primarily interested in therapeutic healing, though a lot of healing came. I started with an interest in spiritual awakening, kind of accelerating my spiritual awakening, but that kind of got knocked out within the first couple of years when the journey took me in a different way. After about 3 sessions, I always worked in a Grofian protocol, right? Shades, lying down, headphones, eye shades. I've never tripped in a classical way. I've always done therapeutically focused, intense work. And as you know, if you've done this work, it amplifies the intensity of the experience many times. And I think now that we have the world's collection of music available to us and we can contour our sessions with that music, it just deepens it even further. I made a choice very early on not to work therapeutically or not to work with other people, not to introduce people into this. A very different responsibility, a different set of responsibilities. I always worked solo, and I was concerned just to push the boundaries as far as I could go. This seemed like a wonderful opportunity for a philosopher to actually get firsthand experience of some of the things that some of the great sages and mystics had been talking about. And so that's what I did. I jumped in. I followed a protocol of working after the first few sessions at high doses of LSD, 500 to 600 micrograms. I aimed always at 600, but I lower it to 500 just in case some of the stuff I was using wasn't completely pure, though it was all pharmaceutical grade. I do not recommend this protocol. This is not a layman's protocol. When you work at those doses that consistently over 20 years, it takes you places that are extremely demanding. They require a great deal of discipline. They require a great deal of spiritual practice to stabilize and hold on to those experiences and to work with them. Yeah, that's how I got into it. Yeah.
Wow. Yep. 500. Okay. Well, so you guys started getting the momentum. You had the impetus early on to kind of follow that trail. You know, for you, Dr. Turpin, you know, the kind of medicine redirected you or kind of brought you into a different landscape in your life, and you had really kind of set off on this trail through inspiration for Dr. Sandgroff. So can you speak to me about a particular time period, maybe a paradigm shifting moment for you when you're working with the medicine that really just opened up you into a new state of awareness? And I know you had many of those expressed in your particular book there, about maybe where you had felt that this particular trail or this path, it just led you into a different level of how your devotion to this work kind of expanded at that particular time from that experience.
You want to start? Go ahead.
I can't say any one particular period or one particular time because let me ask first, how many people have read my book, LSD and the Mind of the Universe? That's why, okay, good. So I can start somewhat from scratch for the majority. Working in this very intense fashion over 20 years, there were so many levels of consciousness that I broke through or that the universe took me through that I can't point to any one time period as a kind of culmination of that period. I just kept at it, and it kept taking me through level after level after level of that process. And I learned that you have to learn how to work with these states. I mean, they're really complicated to work with states. If you're dealing with states at the personal level, that's kind of one level of complexity. If you're dealing with states at the collective psyche level, that's another level of complexity. If you're pushing beyond that into archetypal, into causal, and transcending time and space, and going into the deep territory of history, that I learned requires a tremendous amount of discipline to stabilize and to stay conscious at levels of consciousness that usually when you first go into them, it takes your mind right out. It's hard to hold on to them. It was the length of the journey and going through so many stages. I guess if I were to point to any one point, no, I'm not going to point to any one point. There's too many stages going through it. There was one period of the work when we were experiencing, I think it was the Neptune-Uranus conjunction, and it was squaring my lunar nodes. If you're into astrology, it was a square all year long. And that particular year, which I think was around 1993, 94, just was ripped open the level, and it opened up a new level. But that wasn't the last level. That was just a new level at that time, but it was an extraordinarily productive level. But the deeper level, the last 5 years of my work was in what I call the diamond luminosity. And I'll just mention that when I hit the diamond luminosity material, once I touched that realm, I wasn't interested in any of the other realms that I had access getting up to that level. Because the power and intensity of that domain was so extraordinary, and it was so attractive, and it's so overwhelming that for the last 5 years of my work, that was the only thing I was interested in getting back to. But in those 5 years, and 26 sessions in those 5 years, I only got to that dimension 4 times. Okay? And that was because the cycle involves so much intense purification in order to get back into that territory and then to absorb that territory and going through. Anyway, I'm getting off on it, but off track. But yeah, I guess the diamond luminosity would constitute in some ways a major turning point for me in that material.
I'm afraid my story is a little more terrestrial than yours. And first of all, I'm honored to be on the stage with this guy here. His book was incredible, and it meant a lot to me when I did read it. I felt like I was reading almost like holy texts or something, kind of coming from like the King Acid Head or something. And the fact that he's still intact psychologically and emotionally and everything was really comforting to me when I finally got to meet him. But yeah, I'm kind of like Chris. I can't really point to an experience that really was a profound, that stands out more than some of the others. I just know that, when I made this decision back in the mid-'80s that I wanted to change my major to psychology and work with people doing this work, and devote my life really to studying psychedelics, there was no support. I remember I went to the head of the UGA psychology department, and he was like, "Don't waste your time doing this. This has all been tried. It's not coming back." And almost everybody I went to was not very encouraging about it at Georgia, which was kind of a conservative. I loved the school, but it was kind of a conservative psychology department. So I didn't get much encouragement there. But I did find out about West Georgia College, which was at the time was a humanistic psychology program that had been founded in 1968 in Carrollton, which there's not much going on in Carrollton, Georgia. But I got out there, and there was a guy, Mike Ehrens, who had actually done some work with creativity and LSD back in the 60s. And that's where we got to meet Stan Krippner. Stan Groff came and did a talk there. So it was kind of this deepening. And then that's what led me to California Institute of Integral Studies, which at the time was pretty fringe. It wasn't even APA accredited. My parents were completely freaked out. I wanted to go there and get my doctorate. They're like, "How are you ever going to get a job?" And I said, "I really don't care at this point. I want to learn what they're teaching, and then I'll figure it out afterwards. So I'm not going there to worrying too much about that." But then I guess just to answer your question, I think there was just so many times of doubt along the way where I was worried that I was doing something that was not going to maybe, work out for me. Just times everybody gets doubts. And then there was just always something that would show up that would reassure me and just kind of say, "You're on this path, and it's important that you stay on this path." And I think another lesson I learned very early on was psychedelics, and I think this also works as a psychotherapist too, is maintaining how important it is to maintain humility when you're working with these compounds. I can remember when I was a therapist, somebody come in and we'd have a great session, and I'd be like, "Man, I got this shit. I'm Freud, man. I'm going to be the next Freud. I got this stuff." And then about the next day, somebody would come in collapsing and talk about how terrible they were doing. Then I'd feel like the worst therapist ever, and I didn't know what I was doing. And so I learned the hard way to kind of find the middle ground there. And I think psychedelics did the same thing. It wouldn't allow you to get too down, and it wouldn't allow you to get too high on yourself. I always found that it would just, if I was getting a little high about something, it would knock me down. And if I was getting a little low about something, it would kind of bring me back to that middle place. So I think it was important to just trust that what felt like the direction I needed to go in is what I needed to honor. And I think that's kind of what was happening along the way, is just having various, meeting people at particular times, having particular experiences that would just kind of deepen that whole path and just allow me to just kind of continue to go on it and feel good about it. I think that's kind of how it happened.
Yeah, I love that for both of you, too. The catalyst of the psychedelic, in and of itself, those moments, although they can be profound, it seems like the context of your life, how you synthesize that, how that encouraged you forward, what you learned over the larger spectrum is the real lesson, is the real teaching that came through. And so you guys, for a large part of your careers, you were working in what would be considered the dark ages of psychedelics. Between, the mid-1970s through 2016, there was a complete moratorium on research. It was pretty much ostracized to the far reaches of academia. And culturally, outside of the Grateful Dead and a few courageous other, keepers of the culture, there was very, very little kind of happening at that particular time. So I guess what encouraged you spoke a little bit toward this, what encouraged you to kind of continue on that path where 360 around you. You know, people weren't lifting that up or supporting you in that and the fulfillment of that particular profession. And also, were there any kind of prominent mentors over this period of time, either that you met or perhaps that you were learning from their work extensively? And how did that influence your trajectory as you continue to move on throughout your life?
I'm gonna give this.
Yeah, take it away.
No, I'm
Oh,
gonna give
oh,
this to
goodness.
you.
Okay.
Take it away.
Try to remember all that. I would say, the thing that probably kept me going more than anything was the fact that, I was learning about conventional psychology and psychotherapy techniques at Georgia and then later on. And there was just, when I was reading the old research, there was just something so unique about the way that they were working with mental illness back then and that they were using LSD. And it was a rough treatment. I mean, people were reliving their traumas. And so there was a real need to have safety and trust with your therapist. Unlike MDMA is nice because it shuts down that amygdala, and so you don't have that fight or flight response. But when you're taking LSD to do trauma work, or psilocybin, it's not working on the amygdala like that. So there's a lot of anxiety and trepidation and fear that can come up when you're doing that work. And just noticing the development of psychiatric medications and the fact that our whole drive was about symptomology and trying to mitigate symptoms so that people could get out and function. That was really what the point was. And just realizing that we weren't getting at the core stuff, and that reading that old LSD research, showed that we were getting at that core stuff, and there were these profound changes taking place. There was also a lot of criticism about the research back in the 50s and 60s because it didn't really cotton very well with the old double-blind science routine study design, because when you've got a placebo and a psychedelic, you're going to know within an hour who got the psychedelic and who got the placebo. So there was a lot of criticism about it not being able to be studied scientifically. And then there were some study designs back then that I think were flawed, of course, because people didn't know what they were dealing with. They were trying this stuff for the first time. But I would say probably the people that really influenced me was Stan Groff, too. Just still a brilliant guy. When I read Realms of the Human Unconscious, it was a shattering book for me, just realizing that this guy was going deeper than anybody at the time. And then when I got to CIS, one of the reasons I went out there was that Stan was teaching. Ralph Metzner was out there. And and then just San Francisco. I got to see the Dead like 12 times a year without leaving the Bay Area. So that was kind of another attraction out there. But I think Jerry Garcia was another influence of mine. He wasn't a scientist or a therapist or anything, but he took a lot of psychedelics and he communicated what he learned from psychedelics through his music and his art. His guitar playing was everything. That's all he was about, was expressing through that. And then he ended up falling in with these other guys that had the same commitment and the same pathway to exploring music and the deep psyche. And so going to those shows was something that I would go to those shows and they would always teach me something, or I would just get reaffirmed that this mattered, this stuff mattered, and it was gonna matter, and it was worth sticking with. And again, I think when I read Chris's book, I thought that was really fabulous, because I'd always thought, wow, what would happen if you just took all the acid you could and just went as deep as possible? What would you find? Because, it seems like there's this endless well of something down in there as you go, or out there. And so when I found his book, like I said, I was astounded that somebody had actually done that, and been able to bring back all that knowledge about what you experienced was profound. I've had a number of teachers, I think. Again, Mike Ahrens, he was out at West Georgia. There's a couple of West Georgia alumni here, Steve and David. Those guys remember Mike Ahrens, and I think he was probably pretty important to you guys, too. He was kind of the soul of that whole program, and he really kept it humanistic and very different. He didn't worry about APA accreditation or anything. It was about people going in there and learning what he felt like it was important, not only to be a good therapist, but to grow as a human being, too. And so that was really important. Yeah.
Stan was a huge influence because he's such a powerful intellect, and he had done 20 years of research before he wrote Realms of the Human Unconscious, and I could recognize the caliber of his scholarship. And he taught me, just by reading him, he taught me some essential things, but I think the most important thing he taught me was to absolutely trust the consciousness of the universe, to trust the process, to allow yourself to go into unknown territory, to allow yourself to be sliced and diced and broken down, no matter how bad, no matter how inscrutable it is. If you're working in a safe and contained environment, surrender completely to that environment, and it'll always catch you in the end. You'll die 100 times, but it'll catch you in the end, and it'll embrace you. And that was the most, and I don't think I would have had the courage to go some of the places I ended up going if I hadn't known that Stan had been there first and he had survived to tell about it. Outside of that, and Stan, of course, and I became friends and colleagues, and he wrote the foreword to Dark Night, Early Dawn for me, and brought me to some of the ITA meetings where we had wonderful encounters with different people. But I never had, outside of this intellectual starting point, I always am envious of people who do ayahuasca work, and they say, well, I had this shaman mentor for 10 years that I worked with, and this other person I worked with for another 10 years. And that's just not my story at all. I've never had a mentor like that. All of my mentoring came directly from the universe itself, which has some advantages and has some disadvantages, you know. But I did not learn anything from anybody, I mean, intellectually, but we're not talking intellect. We're talking about, you know, dissolving into the soul of the universe, dissolving into the consciousness that created the universe. About that process, I never had anyone to help me, and it was just a continuous conversation, but then a communion, and then dissolving deeper and deeper into that consciousness, that power, which is the illuminating consciousness and the originating consciousness of all existence, coming back, scribbling it down, trying to make sense of it, and then digesting the larger overall journey. And when I was doing it, like you said, there was no one doing it. I mean, I couldn't really talk. I mean, my friends in the department knew what I was doing, but they didn't really know what I was doing, you know. And I didn't bring it to campus. I didn't bring it to my students. I couldn't teach out of it, which became a real problem down the road, because I'm a talker. I love to learn and share. But I could not share this. I couldn't talk about it. It wasn't allowed to be part of the curriculum, even though I did teach courses in psychedelic therapy, and I did teach courses and seminars on Stan's work and whatnot. I always had to hold my own personal work back. And it wasn't until I really after I retired, and I saved writing LSD in the Mind of the Universe, or my title for that book is Diamonds from Heaven. LSD in the Mind of the Universe is the publisher's title. My title is Diamonds from Heaven. I did not even try to attempt that until after I was retired, until I was after the statute of limitations, and I knew that neither the state of Ohio couldn't fire me, and the federal government couldn't come after me. But that is not the way it's supposed to be, is it? Indigenous cultures, you come out of a deep experience, the first thing you do is you share it with the elders. Because first of all, it's not your private vision necessarily. It's not necessarily about your private life. It's about the life of your tribe. It's about the larger life. And so the elders are your first people to share it with. But in my world, there were no elders. And there was no sharing. And so it involved a very long process of holding and digesting this material personally, individually, sharing it with my wife in a very small circle, but it really had to be contained in that way. And that's not something I would wish on anybody. And I'm very glad that we're coming to a point in history where no one else has to go through that we have enclaves of people you can share and process this work, because I think it's really important to share and process this work together. And to draw from other people's experience, and to be able to say out loud what are probably for many of us the deepest experiences of our life. All right? Yeah.
Can I add something real quick to that?
Yeah.
Yeah, I think talking about the indigenous cultures, I mean, one of the reasons that they used them so successfully for thousands of years in some cases is because they had a framework for respecting and valuing these types of experiences. And they also had cultural blueprint for when people came back about how to integrate and understand what they had experienced and learned. And they were able to do these things safely and productively for thousands of years. And I think one of the issues with our culture is that we were up against, even in the 60s, that there was no framework for understanding or acceptable way to use these things. We were all criminals by taking them just in and of themselves. And so I do think that's a role everybody has right now. We're still very early in this Renaissance period, and I think everybody has a responsibility to learn about these substances and how to use them responsibly and safely, and to also be freely teaching other people that are curious about how to use it. So I think that's a responsibility all of us have here.
Yeah, thank you guys so much for sharing that. You know, as part of my own personal work, I got people through high-dose psilocybin experiences as a harm reductionist. And it's deep and it's profound. And in many ways, you know, I feel as much as a facilitator, as a doula at times, and how the nature of how reorientation and your own perspective can be that paradigm shifting, that you have to reacclimate yourself to how you engage with family and friends and what that means to you now. Well, you can't unknow what you know, so with that new imprint and within you, you have to kind of set sail into a new trajectory. So that support structure is so critical. And in that consideration there, I think two things I wanted to ask you specifically, Chris, is how first were you able to, how did that impact your family? Your father, you have a wife, and you had a wife at the time that was supporting you there, and you have a new partnership now, and all those things that have transpired. How were you able to kind of endure in that time period there? And yeah, we'll stop for that one right now, and then I have a kind of follow up to that. But what was your practice essentially to be able to do that?
First, I had a couple of strategic advantages. I had a PhD in religious studies and philosophy of religion, and so I had the opportunity to study theology and the history of mysticism and mystical traditions. I studied Eastern and Western traditions. I taught in both traditions. I taught in Eastern traditions. I taught courses in comparative mysticism. So I really spend a lot of time with the great masters. And psychedelic experience and great master contemplative experience, these are two different genres of experience, okay? Psychedelic experience is temporary. You have to deal with the temporariness of it from the very beginning. You have to use those hours as productively as you can, but you also have to deal with the fact that you are going into this elevated state, and then you're coming back out of it. Then you sit and absorb, and then you're going into it again, and you're coming back out of it. Contemplative practice is different. There is a fluctuation in and out, but it's a much more of a, you get to hold on to more of what you break into. In the psychedelic state, it's not like that. And so the process of stabilizing, keeping yourself grounded in the world, and absorbing this and holding the position is really important, especially if you're working with a powerful psychedelic that's pushing boundaries and breaking structures and taking you in places that, relatively speaking, very few people have gone, and certainly very few in the academic community, if any, have gone, so you don't have any of that type of intellectual support for it. When Jung went on his deep episode and of when he broke with Freud and he went into this tremendous self-exploration, and he faced this tremendous being overwhelmed by the content flooding up from his psyche, he said what grounded him was his family and his work. And he would say to himself every day sometimes, this is who I am, this is where I live, these are the people I live with, these are my family, these are my children. And I think that's really true. For me, it was family. We had children, raising children, and it was my students. It was that wherever I was on Saturday, on Tuesday, Monday or Tuesday, I was back in the classroom. I was teaching my classes. The other thing that was really important for me for stabilizing is I had a sustained spiritual practice, a meditative practice. My partner at the time, Carol, was a serious meditator, contemplative practitioner. And that was very grounding. It was to know the lives of the great masters, and they were my role models for what could be achieved. and to use them as my role model, and to commit myself to a daily practice that allowed me to absorb not only intellectually or consciously, but to absorb in my body, to absorb the subtle energy, the shifts in subtle energy that psychedelics activate. Because, you know, when you, states of consciousness are states of body. So when you enter extremely deep states of consciousness, your body, you're asking your body to go into extremely deep states of consciousness, states of body. And when you enter very, very pure states of awareness, your body goes through intense detoxification processes, which continue long after the session is over. So I had the opportunity to understand that within the mystical tradition, so that it gave me an opportunity, it gave me a knowledge that I used to ground myself in the world. But I think, to me, it was the commitment of career, the commitment of teaching in my students, and the commitment of working with my children and my family.
Yeah, thank you so much for sharing that. And, you know, that's so important to recognize, is the immersive quality of the psychedelic. You get that deep, profound experience, but as it then starts to subside, then that's where the practice really, truly begins. You know, how do we synthesize that into life, choose actions, choose holistic praise to allow that to become part of our walk, you know, to sustain and support those revelations through life changes and healthy living and wellness.
After I stopped my sessions in the very end stages, one of the things consciousness told me, and it was important to me at the time, was there's the dying of discovery, and we know what that's about, but then there's the dying of keeping. The dying of keeping is different than the dying of discovery. It's what you do when you come back, so that you can hold on to these experiences in some meaningful way and integrate them into your life in some meaningful way.
Mm-hmm. Thank you, Chris. Mm-hmm. So, Dr. Turpin, I have a little bit of a different angle here for you. So, so it's no secret that you're an accomplished psychedelic professional. You know what you've been able to attain with the Pearl Psychedelic Institute, which is only one of 2 facilities right now that are approved for expanded access trials and MDMA and treatment for PTSD. And you recently had someone move through one of those trials. And I just want to go ahead and give a round of applause for the incredible amount of work just to do that, get it to this level. You know, a lot of hearts, a lot of hands that had that happen there. But one of the things that I think you've been able to accomplish is you hold both of these different traditions. One is the extremely diligent therapeutic professional lane that has to be every I dotted, every T crossed to really solidify that particular track. And simultaneously, on the other hand, as you had alluded to several times, is your deep love for Grateful Dead and the ecstatic tradition. That other frontier that is, you know, perhaps all encompasses a little bit more Wild West, but does have a lot of power of community. In some ways, I think has had more influence on culture than any ceremony or therapeutic, the frontier of this particular tradition. So I want to get a sense of what your thoughts are on the importance of both of these particular pathways, and take your time with this. I know there's a lot going on there. Importance of both of these particular pathways, and then how you feel that they can both be held not as, you know, this Grateful Dead is the ugly stepchild of psychedelic, you know, use, but how can we embrace both these pathways and the importance of them furthering this renaissance, furthering this culture?
Good question. I think it's doable. I think it's necessary. Yeah, I think, you know, the medical model that we're that we're kind of pursuing right now, it gets a bad rap from a lot of folks. And when you look back historically, 50s and 60s, early 70s, when psychedelic research was happening, you know, it was old white guys. They were all doing it. There wasn't people of color involved. And it was this very kind of stodgy, science-y thing, guys in white lab coats even for a while there. And so I think that there's some criticism. Some of it is appropriate. That, you know, that if we just keep this to be the province of doctors, that we're going to miss out on a big piece of what we're trying to accomplish here. And I think Albert Hoffman even said, whatever you do, don't leave this only in the hand of the doctors. This is right before he passed away. And but I think that there's a couple of things to think about. I think that the way our culture is set up, I honestly feel like the way that we are going to finally get one of these Schedule I psychedelics across the finish line towards approval is going to have to be through this medical model. It's going to have to show that it maybe successfully treats mental illness and other issues that maybe we're not so successfully treating right now. And so I do feel like that is going to be important to be able to do that. I think one of the reasons MAPS and Rick Doblin chose to push MDMA is that first one, is that unlike LSD and psilocybin, which can create, pretty profound perceptual distortions and sometimes some disorientation, MDMA, even when you're in the throes of a pretty heavy dose, is that there is a mental acuity that stays present, and people tend to have good recall later about what their experience was, and you don't have that disorientation and typically not the perceptual disturbances. And so I think he thought very wisely that would probably be an easier one to get the authorities, the FDA, to consider passing and accepting and making it approved for medicine. So I think it's a legitimate track of research, and I think it's a legitimate way to try to get it across the line in our culture, to get it initially accepted. Now in the 60s, it started off that way. It was in the lab. Even Timothy Leary, once he started doing his psilocybin research in Harvard, he had people like Aldous Huxley and Gerald Heard and these philosophers and writers coming in to Harvard and having psilocybin sessions done with him. And Aldous Huxley was very adamant about, do not let this get out. You need to be careful about who you turn on. You need to turn on the writers and the musicians and the philosophers and the leaders, and you need to introduce it to the culture in this way. And then Leary, being at the forefront of this thing, who didn't, he didn't know what he was doing. And this guy was a deeply flawed human being. I am a big Tim Leary fan, but he was a deeply flawed human being. And one of the things he said was that he made the decision that this should be an egalitarian experience, that he felt like it was the fifth freedom, that everybody should be able to manage their own nervous systems. And so he said, thereby hangs the tale, when he made that decision that it needed to be available. And so the problem was, he went out there telling everybody's got a right to take LSD. Everybody has a right to find their inner God, or whatever it was that people could find. But the trouble was, people would take it, go to a party, their childhood sexual abuse would come up, they would have no support, they would not be in an appropriate setting, and they'd end up in the ER and on the front page of the newspaper. And so enough of those happened, and it gave the government everything they needed to do to try to shut all this down. So I think that we have to be very careful about how it's put out there in some ways. And I do think right now one of the advantages we have that we didn't have in the 70s is the internet. You're not going to put this genie back in the bottle at this point. There's too much information out there. Too many people know about these substances, and in a lot of cases how to use them safely, because there is some good information out there on the internet. So I do feel like that this medical model is, for good or ill, the necessary model that we need to use to try to start to establish these things as medicines. And if our culture can maintain some wisdom and some objectivity in order to continue to measure these compounds objectively as medicines, then we're going to have a much better chance of getting these things approved. So that's kind of that statement. Over here, I had a lot of fun. I had a lot of growth. I had a lot of spiritual experiences that were just unbelievable, and these were not under clinical supervision. And when you look back on the use of psychedelics, plant medicines, ritual and celebration was a huge fundamental human thing that people did, and oftentimes psychedelics were a part of that. And so I think that ability to celebrate being alive, being here on this planet, being with your friends, listening to great music or whatever it is that you're doing, camping or whatever you're doing, I think that's also a very important piece of this. I do think that there is more risk taking that model. I definitely went to some shows and saw some people really struggling that probably should not have been there doing what they were doing for whatever reason. But the Dead was, it eventually evolved into what I call it was psychotherapy on a mass scale. It felt like you'd have about 25,000 people in there, most of them tripping on something. And this music was it was born of LSD. I mean, Owsley, who was their patron saint, was probably the largest LSD chemist in the history of humanity. And he was basically buying their equipment and feeding them LSD. And so they were high all the time, figuring out how to play their music together. And so this music that came out was an amalgamation of all these different styles of music: jazz, rock and roll, blues, Dixieland, experimental. And so you had this very bizarre, yet somehow familiar type of music that came out. And I think it spoke to a lot of people, particularly when they were in these states. Robert Hunter and a lot of the lyricists for the Dead, they wrote very mythical, archetypal types of songs. The lyrics were a song would mean something to me for 5 years, and then I'd be at a show going through a particular experience in my life, and that song would speak to me in a completely different way that I had not been aware of before, which is what great art does. There's just levels of it in there. And so it was this just continuing flower for, I guess, 85 to 95. For 10 years, it was my psychotherapy. But I felt like that they had it set up in a way that there was somewhat of a container. There were rituals around it, from getting the tickets to getting there early, to getting in line, to getting your seats, taking care of each other when you're in there. There was an idea that everybody was there to take care of each other that you don't really see too much at shows anymore these days, unfortunately. But back in the day, there was really that ethos at the Grateful Dead show. So it did feel like a fairly safe place that you could go and let it all hang out, and with a lot of other people. And I can remember times opening my eyes with 20,000 people synced up and everybody grooving. And I mean, I just felt like my head was going to explode. It felt so good. And you realize that there was just a lot more to life than the one-dimensional life that we kind of get up and go to work and do a lot of days. And that sort of inspired me and inspired a lot of other people and a lot of other bands. I mean, there's a lot of other bands that came out of that scene. So I think, to answer your question, I think that whole realm of psychedelic exploration is absolutely important. It's absolutely necessary, I think. But I think that people have to recognize that there's a little more risk that comes with doing them in that kind of environment. And so you need to take it upon yourself to educate yourself about whatever it is you're taking, who you're with, know something about set and setting, so that you can go and have a safe and productive good time.
Thank you, Raymond. Yep, there's, the movements that have spawned from that. Many of our favorite bands, from Fish to my personal STS9, I have to give them a little credit out there, but Freeze and Mo, and also other cultures, Rainbow Gatherings, Burning Man. This is all from the stimulation of that radical creativity, communitas, the environmental connection that comes through that. And I think it's important. People forget, the Eleusinian mysteries, or the Greek sacred ceremonial mysteries, with the ceremonial theater of initiation, with the kykeon, which is the elixir and beverage that was found to have ergot, which is the base component of LSD-25. 2,000 to 3,000 people would go through those mysteries at the same time. So the idea of large alchemical ecstatic ritual is as old as humanity, and an important part of our lineage and a process. So Chris, I want to ask you about now this high-end dosaging, because now, as we've talked about, most of the time when you're looking at the research studies, you're working with psycholytic doses, maybe a moderate dose, everywhere from with psilocybin, be like about 1 gram to about 3.5 grams or so. And there's a lot of deep value there that can come through that particular experience and is profound as well. But most of the time that works with your biographical healing, your own personal wounds and traumas, and kind of working back to that state of acceptance, release, self-forgiveness, reconciliation. But why the high dose? There, as you talked about there, there's a concept of spiritual, maybe self-actualization, those things. But, is there a realm currently right now for people to push further? And if there is, what is it that I think as a collective we might be seeking in that particular space?
First of all, I really agree with you, Raymond, that it's the medical work and the therapeutic work with psychedelics which is bringing psychedelics back into our society. And that's so important. And it's so important that we do it well. And it's so important that we document the therapeutic capacity. And as we do, and once we do that, and once we get it back in, then the question naturally arises, okay, if it's an amplifier, and if it amplifies our consciousness, and if it pulls up all these dark things and we can address them and heal them and reestablish some type of spiritual communion with the universe around us, then how far can we take it? What's going to happen next? And I think that it's going to take some time. And some people are already, of course, pushing where can it go next. But in terms of institutional exploration, we're not there yet, but we will be. It's just a matter of time. Because in these states, it's not the psychedelic that does the work, it's consciousness that does the work. Psychedelic is an amplifier. And so when you get right down to it, it's the psychedelic that does the work. And so if you handle the consciousness carefully, you can use it in the same way that happens on a meditation cushion at a Zen sesshin. And I call my work sessions. I'm very specific about that. And it's really a play on the Japanese word sesshin. A sesshin is a period of concentrated spiritual practice, all right? And so that's the way I think of my psychedelic work. Is there were X number of sesshins, and I can tell you exactly what I was doing on one particular day and one particular year on one particular sesshin in that process. I honestly, sincerely do not recommend that people do what I did, honestly. I mean, there's so many ways for this to go wrong, and I was fortunate, and I had a constitution that I found I had a capacity to open up into great breath and to get very fluid and to dissolve and lose my boundaries at level after level, and then I could congeal naturally at the end of the day. Not everybody is built like that. Not everybody has that capacity. People need more support going into this type of work. And I wouldn't do it the same way over again. I just would not. I would be much gentler with myself. I would work with a balance of high doses occasionally, lower doses, psilocybin balancing with LSD maybe and ayahuasca, but I really would take a much more nuanced balancing approach, integrative approach. I mean, there's kind of a breakthrough session and then lower dose work maybe with psilocybin to absorb and integrate that material. But one of the reasons I would do it differently than I did it when I did it is because I had this mindset when I did this work, first of all, that it was personal. And that I learned it's not personal. Personal is the first layer, but if you push even deeper, then the dynamics of your work stop being personal. They become collective. You're working with the collective psyche. And then you're working with an evolutionary process. You're working with an historical process. And the visions are not personal visions. They're historical visions. They're human visions. And it's a different scale. But I thought when I did this work, I thought that the goal was to get somewhere. The goal was to become enlightened, or to become one with God, or to dissolve into the metacosmic void, as Stan used to say. And what I learned is about 17 years into my work, 16 years into my work, when I was as deep as I would ever go in my psychedelic exploration. I was in the diamond luminosity, and I was in a sweet spot way beyond time and space, resting in the luminous body of the divine in Dharmakaya. In that context, I had a visionary experience. The world opened and showed me a world far in the distance, a light-filled world, and a ray of light hit me from that world, and it absolutely shattered me. It took me 20 minutes to kind of pull myself back together into the light and luminosity condition. And that's when I learned it's an infinite progression. There's no such thing as getting to the end of it. You're not going to get to the end of it, no matter, I couldn't get to the end of it. And that's when I began to appreciate that it's really about opening up, letting as much of the wisdom and of the healing energy and the insight energy that the universe, letting as much of it in as you can manage, as you can handle, absorbing it, digesting it. It's not about getting to a condition of awakening or getting into a condition of God realization. I mean, those are all fine. Those are all wonderful as they come. But as a psychedelic path, it's not about getting to a condition. It's about really how you live your life. So I'm much more attentive now or conscious now of the dying of keeping, the process of the dying of keeping, how you live with those experiences. Because truly, I'm going to be doing some teaching soon in the ketamine-assisted training program what's in San Francisco. And pardon?
Polaris?
Polaris, yeah. And my job is integration, talking about integration. And our discussion of integration works well when you're working at the psychodynamic level or the personal unconscious level. Even when you're having spiritual experiences, you're tapping into the intelligence that runs through all things, and you're tapping into your divine nature, which is part of the nature that runs through all things. We have spiritual models for how to integrate those experiences. But when you push deep into the deep waters, when you're really tapping into deep levels of the infinite, and when you're transcending time, how the fuck do you integrate those experiences? What does integration even mean? How does a finite being integrate the infinite? How does a being which is a time-space being who's finely tuned to the dynamics of linear time and three-dimensional space, how does that being integrate trans-temporal experiences, trans-spatial experiences? What does it mean to integrate them? And so I think we have to sort of stop, erase everything that we've learned about integration, or much of what we've learned when we're talking about working at the personal unconscious level, and it becomes something different. And I think we can learn a lot from the indigenous cultures. But I also think that if we look at the psychedelics that indigenous cultures were using, and we're looking at the psychedelics that are available to us today and the therapeutic protocols that are available to us today, it's not an unreasonable hypothesis that we are pushing deeper than many of the indigenous cultures pushed. And that raises challenges that go beyond even what we can learn from the indigenous cultures on how to navigate those encounters. I think we're going to get there. We're going to get to these issues eventually. I don't think we're going to get to these issues probably while I'm alive. I think this is going to take time. It's going to take time for Raymond and all the Raymonds in this movement to really achieve a true grounding in our culture of these psychedelics. And then we can start to open up the deeper door. And then we start to open up a deeper door still, and a deeper door still. It's going to take, I think it's going to be generations moving into this material. This is not short-term work as a culture. This is long-term work, because what we're talking about is not just learning that there is a wisdom in the universe, that there is an intelligence guiding the universe, or birthing the universe in the Big Bang process and the unfolding process, but we're talking about changing or expanding, radically expanding our fundamental communion with that universe. Then that's a deep, deep journey for all of us to be making culturally together.
Yeah, thank you so much, Chris. Because the next actual question I had was showing how rapidly we're moving, and I think that's really important that you immediately caution that with slowing down and being patient with the synthesis of what this means on such a transcendental level of what it can mean for culture, for civilization as a whole. Because looking at the current Renaissance, right now we have over 350 universities opening formal psychedelic research departments. We have 25,000 op-eds and over 2,000 peer-reviewed journal articles published on psychedelics in just the past 2 years. FDA's impending clearance of MDMA in 2024 for therapeutic use, and decrim and legalization movements across the country, city and state. So we are hitting a momentum unprecedented to this level at this time. And of course, from Oprah to Aaron Rodgers, to you turn on the TV and every other day there's another celebrity who's having an experience. So it's, the genie is very, very much out the bottle. But this idea of that this is going to leapfrog us directly into a space where everybody has touched upon the illumination of the psychedelic. We're all ready to fully synthesize that into daily life. I think that's something that's going to take a lot of time to do it right, to have the ethics and honoring and respect of the deep time of the lineages and the indigenous that come before us. So this is kind of, this question is open-ended, but, where do you see this headed in the next few years? I think from your behalf, Dr. Turpin, you're working right on the front lines of legality, so you're preparing for the at least the gate of MDMA to open up, and there's a lot of work there. I know, just from the side part of that all. And what do you have for advice for us as we continue to step into this ourselves as people that are wanting to be caretakers of this medicine culture and movement? What do you think from your experiences going from the deep depths of the underground and the shadow days to now where we are, where it's now becoming contemporarily acceptable to be open about it? So those two questions there, where do you see this immediately happening, and how's that going forward?
Good question. Well, if taking a psychedelic made you a better human being, then we would all be probably 3/4 of our country would be Buddhas by now. So taking a psychedelic doesn't necessarily make you a better human being. I think there's so much about intention and so much about the integration as far as what are you going to do with the experience that matters. And so I think that we've got to continue to educate people about the importance of that it's not just taking the compound, it's really doing the ritual work afterwards. And when people come into our ketamine program, I tell them right off the bat, don't expect the ketamine to do the work. It might make you feel great. It might absolutely, you might lose a lot of your depression symptoms you've had for 20 years. But if you don't take the insights that you gained in that experience and bring them into your everyday life, maybe do a little less of this or more of this, then chances are you're going to regress back to baseline in 4 to 8 weeks. And so it's so important that people understand that these things are windows into the unconscious and windows into the deep self. I like to use the Jungian giant S self, that the self is this almost limitless thing underneath our, it's part and parcel of our ego, but our ego is just a tiny little part of this giant self. And that the self is this knowing, it is this inner healing intelligence. It knows what we need to be whole and balanced, and it's always pushing to be known, whether it's through dreams or psychedelics or whatever. And so teaching people how to understand that these experiences are glimpses. They're instructional dreams almost. They're glimpses into their deep self, and then teaching people how to value and bring these things forward is going to be the key. So I do see things moving along at a pretty quick pace, quicker than I ever thought. I mean, I was at the point where I was like, damn, I'm like 50. I don't know if this is ever going to happen. Maybe I need to think about going into the underground. But then MDMA showed up, and I was like, wow, okay, maybe it's not too late. I'm still upright. Maybe I got another 10 or 15 years. That's good. So I was real excited to see that happening. And, I think we all, again, have such a responsibility to educate other people, people that are curious about these things, so that they get good information that's grounded in science, that's grounded in tradition, that's grounded in love and self-caring and self-acceptance. It's all so important as we go forward with this. What was the second part of your question?
Yeah, I think for the insight as to advice of us moving forward as a collective. And,
yes.
Then what you see immediately too with the MDMA and Pearl and that moving forward there.
Yeah, the MDMA is interesting. Right now, what I'm hearing, and Haley, correct me if I'm wrong, is that MAPS is in the process of getting their new drug application in place to submit to the FDA. The phase 3 studies are over. We are treating our last 3, for us, MDMA patients, and that's all been closed. The last patients are being treated. And then I understand that there is about a pallet or 2 of paper that have to be submitted to the FDA in a new drug application. And so that all is going to get submitted hopefully maybe by early next year, maybe it sounds like. And then everything I'm hearing is that hopefully if things go well sometime next year around this time, maybe late 2024, we might find it approved for PTSD. The problem is that how long is it going to take for insurance companies to then get on board and be willing to reimburse for these treatments? There are 46, 47-hour protocols. There's 2 guides or therapists every step of the way for good reason. I don't see that model changing after acceptance. One of the things I do see is right now in the expanded access model is the treatment team has to be made up of a lead therapist that's either an MD or a psychologist, and then the co-therapist has to be a licensed therapist. And I think what we're going to see after we move into approval is that one of the treatment team is going to need to be a licensed therapist who's been trained by MAPS, and then technically the other person could be someone that's not a therapist. It could be a nurse, it could even be a clergy member, it could be somebody else, as long as they have been properly trained by MAPS. And so I think that's going to be key to bringing the cost down, is having that be the team makeups, be a little bit more reasonable like that. And one of the reasons we did our nonprofit was to try to figure out a way to generate funding so that people could access things like ketamine and MDMA, because it is going to be expensive for most people until insurance companies do get online. And I also think that there's going to be an enormous need to train therapists in how to do MDMA work. MAPS has been doing a really good job of getting people through their training program, but it gets you all the way to the last step. And so essentially we have hundreds of therapists out there that have gone through the MAPS training, but they lack what's called the supervised clinical experience, which is where you actually treat somebody from the beginning to the end of the protocol under clinical supervision. That's the final step to being certified. So we're going to have a bit of a bottleneck, I think, of therapists when it gets approved. And so one of the things we're trying to do at the Pearl is that my treatment partner, Kim Skelton, and I are trying to treat enough folks and beg the folks at MAPS enough to where we could be a facility where some of these folks from Asheville and in North Carolina could come and hopefully finish their training, get their certification done with us without having to go out of state and do that. So I would suggest for people that are interested in continuing to facilitate this opening of psychedelics, or this reopening of psychedelics, or wanting to get involved in it, it's really about educating yourself. There are wonderful things out there that you can learn from. There's YouTube videos, there's great books. For people that want to do MDMA work, right now you're going to have to go through the MAPS program. That may open up in 5, who knows, years, who knows, but right now they're the ones that have the protocol all down and they're ready to train folks. And then I think psilocybin is probably, maybe everything I'm hearing is like maybe 3 years behind. They're starting some of the phase 3 studies, and so that'll move on, and hopefully that'll be, I think psilocybin is going to have greater utility than MDMA. I think MDMA is always going to be dynamite for trauma work and PTSD work, and also for relational problems, interpersonal communication issues like marriage counseling, couples work. That was what MDMA was shown to have great value for in the early 80s before it became a Schedule 1. And so I do see it continuing to do that. And then I see psilocybin having really wide applicability to many different kinds of issues. And I never thought I'd see LSD getting studied in my lifetime. And it's actually, the door's cracking open on that one too. And that's a little harder because you're looking at 10 to 12 hour sessions, which, as Stan said, were brutal, to have to be in there that long. Even an 8-hour MDMA session can be long. We're exhausted by the end. By 6 o'clock when the overnight person gets there, we're like, man, we're ready. So anyway, I think things are on a good track. I'm always worried something crazy is going to happen and be on the headlines, and then it's going to set everything back. But, so far we've gotten pretty lucky, and I think part of that is because of the internet, and there's been a dissemination of information out there that wasn't there back in the 70s and 60s about how these things operate, what they do in the brain, the importance of set and setting, and how to be able to use these things safely and responsibly. So my advice would be able to just keep your eyes open and see what's coming down the pipe. MDMA is, I think, going to be the first one that gets approved, hopefully. And if you're interested in going into that work, get the background that you need to be able to apply to MAPS, to get the work done, to get the training done. And then again, just continue to model for people out there that this is serious work and we all take it responsibly, and we have it's incumbent upon all of us to have this ethical responsibility as we conduct ourselves out there, because people look at us and go, oh, you're a psychedelic person, and they want us, and I think it's important that we are able to comport ourselves in a way that we're doing our part to help push these things forward.
Let me expand the context. I completely agree with everything you're saying, Raymond. I really do. In terms of particularly applications of MDMA and the broader range of psilocybin, and we haven't talked about 5-MeO-DMT and its therapeutic potential. But I'd like to expand the context a little bit. Those of you who know my work know that my visionary experience is that we are coming into a time of profound social catharsis, crisis, transformational pressure. And so when I look ahead 10 years, 20 years, and I picture this gathering here 10 years from now, 20 years from now, the background social context will be radically different. We're moving into profound crisis, an environmental crisis, global climate change crisis, which is going to be triggering all sorts of economic and social crises, and that means political crises. And when the ocean level is rising and cities are flooding and billions of ecological refugees are moving across the planet, the social instability is going to be enormous. And so that means if we ask, well, what is the role of psychedelics in that changing world? It's not the simple therapeutic processes of today, but my background. I believe in reincarnation. I don't think that's a hard sell in this crowd. It's a standard part of my experience in psychedelic work, and that means that each one of us, if our collective culture is coming into a time of crisis where we have to make life and death decisions about how we live on this planet and how we live with each other, inside we are carrying large pieces of the history of humanity inside our being in our reincarnational history. So what's trying to take place in the world around us is also trying to take place in the world inside of us. And if you are like me, you know that there's a tremendous purification process taking place. There's a tremendous intergenerational, inner evocative process, inner healing process, and it's like, that's why I think so many people are doing yoga and meditation, and they need all the help they can get to handle the uprush that's coming from deep within their psyche. And that's going to increase. That's going to increase in the decades ahead, because this process, we can't make the jump to where we need to go to live on this earth until we have digested and processed and transcended the history of our behavior on this earth and the history of our behavior with each other. And it has to come out, and it has to be dealt with at an individual and a collective level in order for us to be receptive to the inflow, the increased inflow of salvific energy that's coming into us and moving us into a different phase. So that means the dance is changing. The stability of our current world hopefully will last long enough to allow us to get these substances internal to our system. But when we move deeper into crisis, I would see the role of psychedelics for individual and collective healing to increase exponentially if we've done our work at this stage well. And I think that's just really, really, really critical and important. And so my suggestion for how we move forward is we can't simply focus on our internal work. We have to be focused as well on the external work. We have to be working at the political level and the social level and the larger international level, as well as working on the inner level. And those are not separate processes. Those are actually deeply, deeply integrated synergistic processes as we move forward. You know, it all changed with the invention of the nuclear bomb, right? When Eisenhower, who led us in World War II, saw the pictures of the nuclear bomb, he said, that's it. That changes everything. And LSD is kind of like that. Came into existence at the same period of history. The inflow of indigenous cultural wisdom comes in shortly thereafter. Psychedelics change everything. Tremendous intellectual revolution is right around the wings, right around the corner. Tremendous religious and spiritual revolutions are right around the corner, because, you know, it just unleashes tremendous evolutionary forces in our individual lives and in our collective lives. How we handle that is going to be really important. The festivals which will be coming, the collective healing that takes place in these festivals will be really important as we move forward. Yeah, something like that.
Thank you so much, Chris. You know, the power of the social responsibility that you gentlemen charge us with is quite profound. And not only for how we hold these medicines ourselves and caretake them and lead them out there, but how we work with them collectively, how we allow them to be part of our larger, maybe the catalyst for some important shifts in our life and our culture. And one of the things that I've recognized working with psilocybin for so many years is it reminds us of us being first and foremost children of this world. You know, like the mycelium that is underneath us. You know, we are stewards and caretakers of this body. We are gifted with a garden for us to tend. And the more that we learn how to do that and honor our differences and symbiotic relationship with those around us, that creates the foundation for, you know, beautiful fruit, you know, intellectually, spiritually, emotionally, that we create together. So it's as old as time, that lesson, but it's new and it's needed more than ever, as well as we step into this greater age of responsibility and accountability. So thank you all as you're continuing to work with these medicines. You know, these are powerful and profound. You know, harm reduction principles, preparation, navigation, integration, and synthesis of those, caretaking of those around you is all very, very important part of the process, and more than we know. So we're going to open up to questions here from a couple of you, but let's just, again, give a big round of applause and a big thank you to Dr. Turpin and Dr. Bache for their wisdom today. Okay. So we have time for maybe 2 or 3 questions. If you guys wanted to share real quick. Anybody have something? Steve, right here.
Do I need the mic or just shout it out?
Shout it out if you can then. That'll work.
Dr. Bache, I've read your book, and if anybody hasn't read LSD and the Mind of the Universe, read that thing. I've read it about 6 times. And every time I go in, I go deeper and deeper. I'd like you to pontificate about or elaborate about, you've talked about the 200,000 year gestation period that humanity is in, or just coming to transition, like in the birth.
Yeah.
Could you talk about that, elaborate on that a little bit?
The only way I can speak about that, of course, is if I speak out of my visionary experience. And so it's just visionary experience, and it is only visionary experience, and it is visionary experience. The creative intelligence of the universe does not think small. It thinks large. It doesn't really think in terms of just individuals. It thinks in terms of whole species. It thinks in terms of whole ecosystems and planetary development. And so ask yourself, what is the finest that human beings can become? What is, if we look ahead, what is the finest that human beings can be? And then imagine that the divine wants it to be like that, and it wants it to be even more than that. The question then is, how do we go from baboons or chimpanzees to that? And it takes time. It's a repetitive cycle, lifetime by lifetime. We accumulate more knowledge, more wisdom, hopefully more understanding, more wounds. So we're taking care of the wounds, we're taking care of the past while we're expanding potential. Lifetime after lifetime, thousands of years, tens of thousands of years, hundreds of thousands of years, we've been at this process. We have such a tendency to think in terms of short-term perspective. Achieve salvation, go to heaven. Achieve enlightenment, go to parinirvana. It's an up-and-out cosmology which has been driving us, but the divine doesn't think in terms of up-and-out cosmology. It's about a continual reseeding and a fruition that's taking place on the planet and bringing us into ever deeper levels of communion with the creative wisdom of the universe and the joy of the universe, and holding it in our body and holding it in place and holding it in this world together in peace and harmony with the other members of the other species that we share this planet with, and with everyone of the human species that we share the planet with. My sense of what's happening is that we're coming into a pivot point in history where all of the lives that we have lived, each of us can just look around this room. Imagine how many lives are sitting in these chairs. How many hundreds of lives are sitting in each chair? And all of those thousands of years of experience sitting in each chair. And my sense is what's happening in history is that there's a coming together, not only a coming together on the planet, forcing of the changes that's taken, but there's a coming together in the soul, that all of our former lives are coming together. And as they come together, the first thing we have to deal with is all their unfinished business. So we got this pain and that issue and that trauma that comes from this life and that life, and we have to deal with that. But as we deal with that, it makes it easier for these lives to come together. And it's not just the problems that they're bringing, that may be the first wave that shows up, but it's all the learning that they're bringing. It's all the knowledge that they're bringing. It's all the history and texture of their relationships that they're bringing. And remember, these lives have been black, white, every imaginable possibility on the planet, every position in society, every position in class, all the adventures, and they're all coming together. And I think they're coming together and they're beginning a process of fusing. And when, in my experience, in my sessions, when I experienced all my former lives coming together and fusing, there was an explosion. It was like they hit a critical mass and there was an explosion. And there was an explosion of diamond consciousness that just broke out of my chest, and it threw me into a deep and profound condition where I was an individual. But I wasn't an individual. I wasn't Chris Bache, and I wasn't an individual with any frame of reference that I had known before, but I was an individual, but I was in a deep and profound cosmic communion as an individual. And I think that's what's happening to all of us in history. Every continent, every person on the planet is part of this process of facilitating an integration of all of our lives. And this is what I call the birth of the diamond soul. It is simply the birth of the soul consciousness inside our human incarnation. So that when we experience ourselves, we do not experience ourselves in any way as defined by the beginning and ending of this life. We have a natural, intuitive, awake awareness, conscious awareness of our deep history, which means a conscious awareness of our profound social connection, a profound awareness of the relativity of all these little fights that we get into, all these stupid things that we have reasons to get in conflict with, which are not important and not relevant. We're swallowing all these things as we come together, and I think we're moving towards an explosion of soul consciousness on the planet. I don't think we can live on this planet out of egoic consciousness, and I think the ego is a beautiful, individual egoic consciousness is a beautiful, magnificent thing. But we cannot afford to live on this planet out of that state of consciousness. We either evolve into the next state of consciousness, which I think is fundamentally the soul consciousness, or we go extinct. And extinction is a powerful transformational motivator. And I think that's the process that we're coming into now. So how long will this take? How fast can it happen? I don't know. And when I've seen it, when I've experienced it in my sessions, it didn't come with dates and it didn't come with a brochure detailing how it's going to take place. But I've know in my bones that it's happening, and I also know from I offer you from my visionary experience that we will make it through this process. We will survive. We will transform. Humanity will make it through. It won't look like we're going to make it through for a time. It will look like we're going to die in this process. That is the death and rebirth process. We're going to have to put it all on the line. We're going to have to lay it all down and make a complete radical commitment to this process. But my experience is that the diamond soul is born in history. The future human is born. And that future human is magnificently beautiful. Just beautiful beyond description. And we see glimpses of it we see it in Christ. And we see it in the Buddhas and the prophets of history. We catch glimpses of what's emerging forward and what's coming forward in all of our lives. We're being taken there. And we're not in control of this process, right? We're not in control of evolution. We're hardly in control of our own individual evolution. There are deep, deep forces at work that are pushing us, driving us. And lastly, we all knew what we were getting into before we incarnated. We made a choice to be part of this, and we'll make a choice to be part of the next generation. We chose to be part of this evolutionary transition. When you die, you don't want to just have a comfortable life or an easy life. You want to have a meaningful life. And is there anything more meaningful than supporting this transition that humanity is making collectively so that we can really learn to live together in peace on this planet? Healed, truly healed on the heart of all the wars and all the wounds and all the terrible things we've done to each other and all the things that were left unfinished lifetime after lifetime. Imagine a species that's truly healed all that stuff. Individually, collectively, healed it. Robert Monroe, whom some of you know from his books on out of body and the Monroe Institute, his intelligent guides took him to a place in the future which he estimated was about 3000 AD. And in that time in the future, when he went there, the entire bardo, where souls go in between their incarnations, was empty. We had integrated the bardo, because the bardo is basically filled with soul fragments, just pieces of our lives which we didn't get finished or whatnot. Imagine all of those pieces integrated into us so that we are now whole and complete within ourselves, within our history, and so is everybody else that we're living with. If the bardo is empty, the divine intelligence can reach more deeply, more easily, more fluidly right into the very center of our hearts and into our minds. And that's what I think we're all working for. That's what we're all yearning for. That's what we feel it. We can feel it in our bones. We touch it when we do in our individual healing. We touch that and we know that there's something afoot which is much deeper even than our personal healing. But our personal healing is part of it. We have to go through that if we're going to contribute to the birth of the diamond soul in history. Yeah? Yeah.
Wow.
Well, I think we might have gone on time with that, and I almost don't feel like it's even. I don't know how you could actually follow that up, to be honest. Yeah. But we will be here for some time, so if you guys want to connect afterward and mingle, and please do come up and share. And these gentlemen will be here for a little bit of time to connect. And so we're going to be wrapping up this session, but on behalf of the Psychedelic Society of Asheville, we are so, so grateful and honored to have these wonderful guests do a fireside chat with us here this evening. Yes. So once again, thank you guys so much. And please do stay in touch with us here. We're psychedelicsocietyavl.com. We do once a month, usually the final Sunday, or of a gathering together. We shift different topic matters. We have sometimes more back and forth sessions. We're connecting with people, cross-pollinating. Sometimes it's more harm reduction guidance, getting insights how to do this safely, ethically, stepping into this work of medicine with education and resources. Sometimes bringing our creative friends in there. We had a panel of artists that came in and gave how this medicine has influenced their beautiful crafts. So please do be a part of this community. We're open-hearted and welcoming of all peoples, and stick around for a little bit and say hello to each other. There's a lot of beautiful folks in here that we'd love to continue to establish relationships and friendships here. So once again, thank you to Melissa and Joe from Sky Mountain as well, helping us have this beautiful setting for the talk. Kind of wish I was facing this way, but this was excellent as well. And blessings to you all, and have a wonderful evening. Thanks for coming out tonight.
Thank you. Wow, that's great. Thanks.